What is up, everybody? A reclassification, a legacy prospect, and maybe some names that you're not thinking about. There's plenty going on the UGA recruiting front, and we're going to talk all about it with John Garcia here on the Locked On Bulldogs podcast.
You are Locked On Bulldogs, your daily podcast on the Georgia Bulldogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. I am Daniel, and joining me today is John Garcia Jr. From over at Sports Illustrated. John, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. It's the middle of the week. Can't complain.
Yeah. It's there's no off season. Clint and I are famous for saying there's no off season in college football, and your job highlights that maybe more than anyone. No matter what Dan Mullen will tell you, recruiting is a 24/7, 365 job. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're not gurus or insiders, Clint and I, but John is a bona fide guru and insider when it comes to some of these recruits. So going to pick his brain a little bit. Thanks for joining us. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, leave us a comment, thumbs up, all that good stuff. If you're joining us on audio, Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, follow over there, leave us a rating and review. All those things are helpful. Locked On Bulldogs, part of Locked On Atlanta. And so, John, I'm just going to jump in. I teased a little bit in the open, but biggest recruiting news, obviously, for Georgia is a bit of maybe a surprise reclassification. I think it caught some people by surprise. And so I'll maybe ask you first, when it comes to Marcus Washington, did it catch you by surprise, this move from 2023 to the 2022 class? And then when you think about the cornerback prospect that he is, how big of a deal is this for Georgia, and what will he mean for the team in the immediate future?
Yeah, I was surprised. I mean, you never just assume that a kid is even in position to move up an entire grade academically. And then when we do see these, Daniel, they come in the summer, not so much in the spring, because usually you have to take an extra class or two in the summer to wrap it up. And then boom, you can get to campus right before fall camp, like JT Daniels and Quinn Ewers did at quarterback at USC and Ohio State, respectively. So I was certainly surprised to see a DB do it early in the middle of the spring, I should say. But look, this is needed. This is needed for Georgia. I mean, you don't have to search very far to hear Kirby Smart calling out for defensive backs. Like, hey, like we had a great class of 2022, an elite secondary class of 2022, but you need more. You need more depth at corner in particular. I know in the spring game they had to slide, I believe, a safety or nickel over the corner just to kind of get through the reps at G-Day. So that's not a great sign in terms of depth going into any year. So naturally, I'm sure they crossed some T's and dotted some I's with the 23 class and said, hey, is anyone close to getting over here? And Washington had been committed and has been solid with a mature game as well. And I think that kind of put everybody into focus and said, hey, let's try to do this thing. So I think it's advantageous for Georgia and for the kid himself. He probably wasn't thinking about it till a certain point recently. And then you find out, hey, I can do it. And hey, they want me to do it. So it becomes this, I need to go do it, kind of deal where you just kind of rise to the occasion. And I think it's really cool. It's going to give him an opportunity to obviously get an entire year of extra tutelage under Kirby Smart and a staff that has churned out defensive players towards the NFL and all conference lists and all of that in between. And it's a cornerback room where I think he's a little bit different than some of these other freshmen that are coming in. Jaheim Singletary is your big physical all-around corner that can do a little bit of everything. Julian Humphrey, smaller, slender, faster. He's the track star of the group with immense ball skills. You sign some safety types as well. So I think with Washington, he gives you a little bit more balance. He's more of a conventional boundary
Hmm.
type corner who can play physical. He's instinctive, really like his hips and ability to change gears and gear down when he breaks on the football. And he's got some length to him as well, 6'1" or so on top of it. So I do think he provides something a little bit different compared to some of the other corners that are coming in to UGA that are a little bit bigger and or different in skill set.
Yeah, I love that. And, so many facets to this, but I think the key that you touched on right there is development. I mean, it's a year to develop. And who would you rather your football players be developing under? Their high school coaches or Kirby Smart and the defensive staff at UGA? And so, in an immediate standpoint, he may not be on the field, obviously, other than maybe some special team roles or whatever this coming season. But I think you're going to see it pay dividends for the kid moving forward. I love moves like this. And who knows? I mean, I assume you don't know, but like Clint and I were speculating just on the phone to each other off the air the other day. But I think with NIL, you're going to see more and more of these reclassifications, don't you think? Because, if you have the choice between going to prom and making $100,000, on some sort of a deal, I'm not saying Marcus Washington's got a deal cooked, like all worked up in the books or whatever, but there's opportunities now for these athletes to be compensated, versus at the high school level where, it's just kind of run of the mill. So I think it's good. I think it's good for him. I think it's good for Georgia. And like you said, Kirby's got that APB out for defensive backs 24/7. He never has enough. He's never satisfied, which is what we like. So let's talk about. I got a couple other prospects I want to bring up to you and mention. But first, want to tell the people about BetOnline. BetOnline is your online sportsbook expert. They're the official sportsbook of the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. They're the place that Clint and I trust. If you want to go place a wager online, if you want to bet on the PGA Championship coming up this weekend, if you want to bet on Major League Baseball, the NBA Conference Finals, if you want to bet on college football futures, get a little Heisman future love in there. John, what do you handicap Stetson Bennett's Heisman odds at right now? What you think it's worth? You think it's worth a little sprinkle for the people if they want to just sprinkle a little on there?
There's certain criteria for the Heisman, right? Usually, you got to play quarterback, got to win a ton of games, and then I think for some you got to show improvement. So if he starts throwing it a little bit better, you never know.
Listen,
that could be decent. Look, they're going to win a ton of games and be playing important football with a spotlight. He's got 1,000 years of experience. Hey, why not? A couple dollars never hurt.
Correct. Here first, John Garcia Jr. believes that you should bet on Stetson Bennett to win the Heisman. That's what he said on our podcast. So go to betonline.net, place that wager, enter the promo code Locked On. You get a bonus on your initial deposit. They give you some free money, so you don't want to risk your own money on Stetson Bennett to win the Heisman. Just use that bonus money, use that free money, and then if it comes back to you, all the better. You're going to get some decent odds. BetOnline.net, your online sportsbook experts. All right, John, talked about the big news, the immediate news, Marcus Washington news. Let's talk about some other potential 2023 prospects and a guy that I know a lot of Georgia fans very familiar with because of the pedigree and the legacy that he comes with. Justice Haynes, running back here, local from the state of Georgia. What do you like about this kid? Where do you think Georgia stands in terms of his pecking order? Obviously a need that Georgia has, running backs in this class. And so this is a kid a lot of people like. And then maybe the most important question that I have for you, which is hopefully a reference that you will get, is there a chance that this kid will ever step on somebody's face with a hobnail boot and break their nose? That's the question that Georgia fans really want to know the answer to.
Yeah, of course. That's the first question that we'll answer here. Yes, I think he's got that in his toolbox there. But look, Justice is a monster running back. 200 pounds. He looks bigger than that. Multi-sport guy, just athletically brings so much of what you want, both in the conventional thought of what Georgia does at running back, which you think of your downhill, powerful SEC style of backs, but also he can counter and be that shifty guy. He could be a little bit more Sony, James Cook in his game as well. Very comfortable in space and out of the backfield. So I think he could be a bit of a hybrid type of back, when he does get to the collegiate level. And yeah, it's become a heavyweight battle for him. This is a kid who has been a high school starter since he was a freshman and put up gaudy numbers. Like you said, he's a legacy prospect at that running back position. So there's a lot of buy-in and benefit of the doubt that Haynes has at his back, and that's resulted in a huge blue blood battle at the top of his recruitment. There's a dark horse in USC that will get an official visit. So I'm not sure how much they're in it, but really I look at this thing as Georgia's race to lose. Alabama's in there. Other schools are in the mix, sure. They'll get official visits, but Georgia's going first. And I think that's huge for the Bulldogs because today we feel like they've got an advantage and a lead in this recruitment. So when you pair that with the first official visit, we're just 2 weeks away right now from that early June trip, you in theory extend that lead and set the bar for how official visits are going to be judged going forward. So I think that's a really smart position, no pun intended, for Georgia to be in with Haynes. Like you said, running back is a priority this year. I was connecting with a source near Athens today that said multiple backs are for sure the plan for Georgia in this 2023 cycle, and they've got 0 committed right now. So obviously,
Okay.
if you're going to start somewhere, you'd love to start in state with a known name and commodity like Justice Haynes. And I think if he ends up anywhere else at this point, I'd be a little bit surprised. Recruiting's strange and things change. Certainly, he's going to take trips. He's tight with Caleb Downs. So you wonder, they're going to take some trips together and maybe that could start to influence things in different directions. Sure. But individually and all things considered, with Georgia getting that first official, I do think they're in great shape to keep him in state.
Yeah, that's great. That's great news. A lot of dog fans want to hear. I think sometimes the name on the back of the jersey when it comes to these legacy prospects is just as important to the fans as the high school tape or any of the other stuff, just because we remember where we were when Veron Haynes crushed Tennessee's face, and so having his son on campus wearing the red and black would be huge. I think he's coming to Athens Downs. Is that right? Are their official visits the same?
Yeah, I think both of them have 3 or 4 scheduled, and I believe both trips to Athens and Tuscaloosa line up. I'm not sure about the other ones. Like, I don't think Downs is looking at USC, and then Caleb's got North Carolina in it, where his brother plays. Like, I don't think Justice is looking at that school.
Yeah.
So, but look, they're tight. If they want to play together, I think it's an old-fashioned Kirby Smart versus his old boss kind of deal. And I could see it going, all Georgia's way. I mean, they are in-state recruits. I could see him splitting as well, but I don't see Georgia missing on both of these guys as things currently sit, which is obviously where you want to be.
Yeah, that's good. The worst case scenario, only get one would be that'd be a nice outcome. I got a big picture recruiting question that comes to mind as you were talking, and then I want to ask you about some other recruits. We'll get to that in the third segment. First, I want to talk about Built Bar, the tastiest protein bar on planet Earth. That they're high in protein, high in fiber, low in sugar. They're great for whatever meal plan or diet you're on, keto approved, and most importantly, they're the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. And so, if you enjoy things that taste good and that are also good for your body, then Built Bar is an obvious no-brainer choice. We've been telling about them on the pod for years. Right now, to BuiltBar.com, enter the promo code LOCKEDON15. You get 15% off your first order. That can be 1 box, 2 boxes, 10 boxes, 20 boxes, whatever you order. 15% comes right off the top, which is a great way to save a ton of money and try out some of their, I think, 11 amazing flavors that they have available right now, all at BuiltBar.com, the tastiest protein bar on planet Earth. All right, John. So I want to ask you about other guys maybe that Georgia might be looking into. Maybe even potentially, you mentioned multiple running backs. So who are some of those other names? Before we get to that though, you bring up a question about first visits and the importance of that. And so I'm just curious because you typically hear kind of 2 schools of thought, that you want to be first in the door or you want to be last last visit. You want to be holding the cards at the end of the game in terms of these visits. What do you see as being more important or more impactful on a program's likelihood of signing a kid? First visit or last visit?
I think it's probably dependent on the kid, and maybe even his position or where he's from. So in this case, where for Justice Haynes, where you feel like you got a lead in state, super familiar, legacy, all these things, I think you'd want to go first in this one. You want to
Okay.
reemphasize all those points and extend the lead so theoretically far that Bama, USC, Notre Dame, whoever else is in it is just chasing at that point. But on the other side of it, there's a lot to sell for that final visit, right? At the end of the day, these are teenagers. These are highly impressionable young people with a lot going on around them. And the last school to show them that quote unquote love that they all talk about could get that recency bias out of the way. So for me, if it's an out of region guy, like maybe like Georgia's recruiting a Brock Bowers from California, okay, let's get the last visit. Like, let's get the last
Mm.
impression, make them take that long flight back home to really let everything sink in before a final decision is to be made. And especially when you think of kids in SEC country, you'd rather get that first trip, because if you get the last one, they could pop over to another school really quickly, right? Geographically. But if it's a California and a kid from the Northeast, even Texas, I would say get that last visit, get that last impression to as to why, hey, this is why I'm pulling you out of your region to come down south and into Athens, so you can get that final call, that final in
Hmm.
person impression. So that's kind of my generic way of answering it. It's good either way if you're first or last, to be opposite of Ricky Bobby. But you really just don't want to be the middle visits. But at a certain rate, you don't want to say no either, right? So if you're
Yeah.
Alabama in this case, and Justice Haynes and Caleb Downs are going to visit that second weekend of June, you're not going to say no to that. You're going to say, yeah, come on down, come together, we'll figure it out. And those programs can contend anyway, but yeah, you want to be first or last. And to me, it could depend on the position and where you're trying to pull them from.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting observation. And at the end of the day, obviously, the visit order only is going to come into play in kind of the rare instances where a kid might be totally on the fence between one school and another and gets that, like, but at some point, yeah, if you're Georgia, if you're Alabama, if you're if you for at some point, I'm sure, and look at what you've got, and then if they want to be involved, they can and will. So okay, let's jump into some other prospects who Georgia might be considering, who we haven't talked about yet in this 2023 class, and maybe start with some running backs. You mentioned might want to take multiple. Right now, that means Justice Haynes would at minimum be half the class that we would want. And so, who are some of these other names that Georgia fans need to be paying attention to if they're not already?
Yeah, well, you can't pencil Haynes in just yet. So yeah, you want to cast a
Sure.
wider net with elite backs, and this is a good year for backs. Different style of running backs are available, and Georgia's been pretty busy. Just offered two different backs that are really interesting. One, Taekwon Mizell from down in South Florida, a speed and space type of back. So think of your more James Cook type of
Mm.
mold, and then just I believe yesterday on Tuesday they offer Roderick Robinson, a bigger, more physical back with ties to the South. Although he goes to high school in San Diego, California, he's got a lot of traits that a lot of schools like. And look, Georgia's gone out to California to pull a nice back in the past with Kendall Milton. So those are the
Absolutely.
two more recent targets. Both of them are kind of in that middle stage of the process where they are starting to narrow down official visits and favorites, but they still got a little bit of time before committing late in the summer months. So you see if Georgia can make a play for either of them. But there's also some long-standing running back targets for UGA that have been targets for 2 years, it feels like. You got to go to Reuben Owens from the state of Texas, a track star, a guy who's played receiver, just a big physical all-around back who can do so many things on the outside or in between the tackles. Heavyweight battle for him. Again, he's been a known national recruit for some time. One time Texas commitment, and they're still in it, as well as A&M, Bama, Georgia. USC was the other school in the top 5, but he also took a trip to Michigan State here recently, which was kind of interesting. So his list could be shifting, but Georgia's really been in the thick of it for quite some time. I was in Texas recently, and I was told while there, if any team's going to pull him out of Texas, it's going to be Georgia with their longstanding history and especially this recent run of using multiple backs so very well over the last few years. And then there's Richard Young, who really feels like a classic Georgia type of running back. One cut, downhill, physical, explosive in short areas type of back, much more of your Zamir White style of running back, which still certainly fits what Georgia wants to do. It's another heavyweight battle, though. There's a lot of schools involved: Florida, Notre Dame, Alabama. I mean, some of the Ohio State, the same schools we always talk about, right? For the best backs in the country, they're in it in the thick of it with Georgia. So he's going to take a bunch of official visits in June as well. I actually think the Georgia trip is in the middle for him. So it's not first, it's not last, it's kind of in the middle. So, you don't get that elite positioning, but again, Richard Young knows what he's getting at Georgia, and Georgia knows what they can sell on their end. So I think he's going to be an interesting one to track. He's one that is a little less linear than Owens in terms of, hey, who's really in it today? I think with Richard, it shifts a little bit. I think Alabama had buzz at one point. Before that, we heard buzz with like Oregon, where after he visited there for the spring game. So it's shifted a little bit more with Richard Young. Ohio State's held some buzz as well. So Georgia can still factor into this thing because he's a kid that has really been open in the process. So it's not even just his top 5. It's schools outside of that group that are going to be able to get him on campus as well. So he's one to keep an eye on as well. But obviously, great candidates, different style of backs for Georgia, and they're pretty much in the thick of it for all 4 of those that we mentioned. And they've been kind of heavy on the offer trail, so more offers could be on the way too.
Yeah, it's interesting, the recruiting game. It's a national game, obviously. Big schools are, long-standing kind of take among sort of Georgia fans, or some Georgia fans at least, some pocket of Georgia fans, is this like, we got to lock down the state of Georgia mentality, which you can understand the logic. There's a heck of a lot of NFL talent that plays high school football state of Georgia, and so those guys as you possibly can. But recruiting, as we've seen with guys like Kendall Milton and Brock Bowers in recent years, and going all the way back to Georgia's pulled backs from, it feels like, all 4 corners of this country. No Sean Marino grew up in New Jersey, and like backs out of California, backs out of Texas. Obviously, you mentioned a guy like Richard Young. Feels like a legacy of Florida running backs that come up, to play for Georgia, and so you got to be willing. And then you have you mentioned Michigan State, you mentioned Oregon, and you got all these. Those are just 2 former Georgia coaches right there, but like, you got all these assistants with all these recruiting ties to the South who go, who are coaching in all these other places. But that doesn't mean that Dan Lanning's not going to be down here in his backyard recruiting. And so, this is kind of the game that Georgia fans kind of have to get used to. You got to be willing to take the best players no matter where they are, and you got to be willing to fill your needs and get the best available talent too, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're national. Even if you're in a great state like Georgia or Florida or Texas or Cali, just look at any national title roster. You have to recruit from a national standpoint. Even that LSU team in 19 that you just assume, oh, there's a bunch of Louisiana guys. Not the case. A lot of Texans, a lot of Alabamians, Floridians, and even further beyond as well. So you have to recruit nationally in this day and age of college football to win it all. And once you get to that mountaintop like Georgia is right now, maintaining that is the same formula. You still have to continue to push from coast to coast, and we expect Georgia to continue to do it.
All right, man. Look, I got 50 more questions I want to ask you, but I got to respect your time and get you out of here. So we're gonna have to do it again very soon. If you're not already, go and follow John on Twitter at John Garcia _Jr. All of his you get links, I'm sure, to all of the content that he's putting out through that. He's not just covering Georgia or the SEC, but is looking all across kind of the landscape of college football. And so if you want to be connected to what's going on in the world of recruiting, John's your guy. John, really appreciate the time. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
All right. We will see you guys tomorrow on the Locked On Bulldogs podcast.